Hey y'all, hey. If y'all hear a lot of noise, please excuse me because Jay's in the front and he lit. I had to come get in the prayer closet, but I still hear it. Excuse my head. We snowed in, so your girl been big chilling, but I want to hop on here really quick. Just in case you all haven't had a reason to thank God for his grace, I'm getting ready to give you one. Yesterday I was reading Leviticus 13 and 14, and in Leviticus 13 and 14, it was about skin diseases, mildew in clothes, how to determine whether a home was up to par or whether it was considered unclean and things of that nature. But something that stood out to me was in chapter 13, how they spoke about the unclean people, the things that they had to do, the process that they had in place, the procedure that they had put in place. So for those that were considered unclean, they had to tear their clothes and they had to walk around with their heads uncovered, with their hair hanging basically. So the fact that they even had to state this let me know that this caused them to not look like everybody else. So imagine if you're walking around and we're all walking with our clothes looking like this, and we're walking with our heads covered, and we see somebody come through the crowd and their clothes are torn, their heads are uncovered. We're looking like, okay, what's the problem? It's going to draw attention to them. And even though this thing was not in place to embarrass them, it brought attention to them. So when we think about the tearing of the clothes and how they had to uncover their heads, this was an outward indication that something was going on inward. So it was like a red flag. Hey, what you're seeing on the outside is because something is wrong on the inside. Something's not right. So not only did they have to tear their clothes, have their heads uncovered, but they had to walk around with their mouths covered and yell out, unclean, unclean, every time they were around other people. So this was not to bring shame to the people. However, this was something that they had in place for the safety of those in the community. See, back then, things weren't how they are now. They couldn't go to the hospital and get a prescription and just be fine. So they had things in place. And they were yelling out unclean because they was letting people know to stay far away from them because they were not clean. They were not clean. Third thing that stood out to me is the fact that when they were considered unclean, the access that they had to the tabernacle was cut off. So that means that they no longer had the access to God, to commune with God the way that they had become used to, because now they were unclean. They were unclean. So when I think about all of the emotions that could come with this process and the things that they had in place, the standards, when I think about all of the emotions, it could have caused them to feel embarrassed, ashamed, angry, hopeless, neglected, rejected, and so many different things could have taken place as far as their emotions, and being cut off from the tabernacle. Being cut off from the tabernacle, I can only imagine the toll that was on them from that alone. So when we think about the emotions that comes with being considered unclean and the process that you got to go through, being quarantined and letting everybody know your business and all of this, when we think about that, we can think about the emotions that comes with sin, that being considered unclean can go hand in hand, with sin. Because for one, sin separates us from God. The same way being unclean cut off their access to the tabernacle, their access to God. So living a life of sin, enjoying sin, having consistent indulging in sin can separate us from God. Also, sin can bring along condemnation, self-hatred, anger, rejection, all type of things can go on when you're living a life of sin. Reason being is because living a consistent life, a active life of sin, separates you from God, which means it takes you out of the hand of God and places you in the hand of the enemy. Now you have given the enemy access to you to have his way with you, to do whatever he please, whether that's using your emotions or playing with your mind. You are now in the hands of the enemy. So we can tie this sin to this uncleanness. And when I think about nowadays how we see so many people who have built platforms and built ministries up on the exposure of man, the exposures of others, they have consumed themselves with the wrongdoing of everybody else. They have consumed themselves with what this person said, what this person do. They have consumed themselves with being one to expose the wrong, the sins, the faults, the shortcomings of everybody else. So when I think about this, it makes me think, if things were now how they were back then, there would be a lot of silent people. There will be a lot of silent people. Reason being, there's two reasons why. First reason why is because everybody will be telling on themselves, so you will have nothing to tell. The second reason why is because they will be too busy trying to juggle everything that they're dealing with when it comes down to having to a law being in place to where you are required to expose and uncover yourself. You wouldn't have time to consume yourself with what other people are doing. And not saying that there shouldn't be a concern for people being led astray and things like that. Not saying that there should not be a concern. However, to solely consume yourself and commit yourself to the exposure of man does not bring glory to God. So just think, if we were required to walk around and yell out, adulterer, I commit adultery, I'm a gossiper, I lie, stay away from me, I have AIDS, stay away from me, I cheated on my boyfriend, stay away from me, alcoholic, stay away. If we had to walk around and expose ourselves, just think of the level of humility. First of all, not only the level of humility that will push us into, but just think about the emotions that we will have to juggle. Being isolated from people, not having access to the tabernacle, not being able to engage with people because something is wrong with you, having to walk around and make announcements and look set apart from everybody else, dealing with the way people may treat you and the things they may say, the statements they may make, because I'm pretty sure back then there was some people that made statements or may have treated these people certain ways. But just think about having to juggle all of that. You wouldn't find the time to try to expose somebody else, because you wouldn't know when your time would be coming again, but you would be certain that it's coming again. You just wouldn't know when it's coming again. Think about how they had this priest. This priest had to had to determine whether they were clean or unclean. This priest was the one who quarantined them and put all of these things in place to make sure that everybody was safe. They had to make sure things were flowing the way they needed to, so everybody was safe. So just think, if things were the way they were back then, my God, how has things changed? Things have truly changed. Having to walk around and tell on yourself all day long, baby, you wouldn't want to say nothing about nobody. You wouldn't want to say anything because you're now you're required to expose your own red flags. Tell people to stay away from you because of the things that I indulge in, the bondage that I'm bound to. You might get tangled up. You might get tied up. You might get chained up to what I find myself struggling with. So you have to stay away from me. So I'm not giving anybody else the opportunity to expose me, but I'm going to sit up and I'm going to tell on myself.